All right, so what I have, just from the ground up, I have a blank white layer, which is like the paper white of photo paper. I have my solid color fills. There's a few areas I still need to fill in. So at this point, what I want you to do is any areas that are just still pure white, I want you to pick kind of a neutral tone, either warm or cool. I think I'll pick a cool, like that, and then just fill them in with the paint bucket. So anything you haven't made a choice for, just fill it in so that when you turn off your white layer, you don't have a lot that's just empty. And then I have the blacks and grays on top. And then on top of that, I have this little special effect, which is an overlay with color mode at a very low opacity, which helps bring some color into those black areas. Now my color fills aren't perfect yet. And when I see a problem like an edge like that, I go to my brush, but I keep my paint dropper to sample only from the current layer. And then I stay on my color fill layer. It's the only one I'm using that's not locked. And I can sample from underneath it and not have the grays mixed in. So I can match those colors perfectly and tighten up any edges within reason. We don't need to get this perfectly colored where we fill in every line exactly right. We're not getting paid enough to do that. All right. So once we're happy with our flat colors, now we move on to what's called duotone color. And that's when you add highlights and shadows to your flat colors to get the variations that are more believable. And what's nice is we don't have to do very much for that at all because we've already chosen all of our flat colors. So making those hard decisions makes our life a lot easier. All right, almost done here. So for the sake of the demo, I'll move along. Now, there might be little details that you didn't do the flat color for, like this, like brass lock and doorknob. But the big ones you want to make sure you get, like the edge of his shirt here. Because your flat colors become your first step. And you want them to be pretty well tied to the different local textures, the skin, the shirt, the guitar, etc. There's more green than I imagined. Let me do that quick. All right, so now, how do I do duotone color? Well, I'll show you on the face what it is. First, I can make a duplicate of my color fills. And I might rename this Duotone. Just to help me understand the difference. And right now they're identical. But what I can do with this duotone layer, while I have the black and grays showing, is first I want to play with levels. And I want to push the highlights pretty extreme to one side. Not so much even the highlights, it's just the midtones. If I push the highlights extreme, we'll just go to black and white. But the midtone's pretty high, maybe a little bit of the highlights. Okay, so there's now a big difference between these colors and these colors, right? One's lighter, one's darker. Then I'm gonna duplicate that duotone layer, and I'm going to push the levels, the midtones a lot darker, like this. Okay, so what I have is I have kind of the shadow values, the highlight values, and then the local color. Now what you can do is take your duotone copy, which you could also think of as your duotone shadows, and this is how those local colors will look in shadow. And if they're still too saturated, like my guitar is still really saturated in the shadows, then I might also do a saturation adjustment and just take the saturation down a little bit. So now that's more of what those local colors would look like in shadow. And sure enough, now it looks like everything's kind of under a dark overhang for him. And if I don't think it's extreme enough, I can always use levels and push the darks a little bit darker. Right? And maybe even push the color balance and make it a little bit on the cooler side. So we're just modifying the colors we've already picked. So the highlights, maybe I'll deaden a little bit, and the shadows I'll cool. And then the overall saturation, except for the reds, I think I want the reds to be more saturated and the yellows to be a little bit more saturated on this duotone shadow layer. But the others, like the cyans, maybe a little less saturated, the blues maybe a little less saturated, maybe even a little lighter. The magentas. So you're messing with it. You're trying to find it. So those are my color values, very different than my highlight values. And now what I can do is change to an eraser. And I'm going to make my eraser a low opacity, maybe somewhere around 30%. And I'm going to make my eraser large and soft-edged. And I'm going to erase away wherever I want the highlights to be. For some reason his skin tones really got lost. So let me deepen those in this duotone shadow layer. I'm just going to select these. I like the ones on the hands. Or put that on the face. All right. So now on that duotone shadow layer, I'm going to use that eraser at that low opacity, and I'm going to start erasing out where I want the highlights to be, like on his nose, on his forehead, the planes of his cheeks. The highlights of his ears. Slightly give it a different temperature. And then same thing, now that I've erased it out, I want to look at the highlights layer. And I want to play with its hue saturation and maybe give it a little bit more saturation. Give it a little bit more pink. Just to split that local color into some different parts. So it's playing with the coloring you've already done. Now the beauty is with just that eraser, I can erase the highlights everywhere in the picture. So I'm not painting anymore, I'm just finding highlights and hitting those with that soft brush, like on his Adam's apple, on his shirt, at the edges, the bright spots. It's like being able to show wear on the shirt so it doesn't look so perfectly new and even. And again, you have to have good, accurate, flat, local color to be able to do these modifications. But it works quite well. So on his hand, in the highlights, even though they're not the most accurate, I can show that. And where I don't erase, the shadow comes through. On the guitar. On the fretboard. Now where you didn't make very strong color choices, that's not going to get modified by just your levels adjustment, because what we changed were the existing colors, and if you didn't fill them in, then they're not there to mess with or to blend between. So that's the flat color. That's with the duotone highlights. And that's with the duotone shadows. And then, of course, like everything we do with layers, we can play with the opacities and see how much they help. So I can take my duotone highlights, and I can take that opacity down if I want more of that flat color to come through. And the shadows, I can see how much of that I want. But it's going to give me variation in my flat colors. That is helpful. You can see those. Makes the guitar feel a lot more organic. I need to work more on the face, I think. And so that's a good way to start. And now with your brush, instead of a hard edge 100% brush, I'm going to use a 0% hardness and a lower opacity brush. And start kind of using blush. Picking, whoops, come on, keep up with me. Picking certain colors for certain things. So I'm going to save it now that I've done those duotone layers. And if I want more pink in his cheeks, he's gotten very washed out. Now I can do it with soft edge color and kind of modify underneath. So on the shadow layer, I can kind of paint in some of these pinker shadows. And this is only for like areas where you want lots of focal attention, like on the face, around the eyes, in the hair. I can soften the edges between the hairline and the scalp, which should be a soft edge, not such a crisp edge. Right. Give him a little bit more rosiness in his cheeks, and you build it up slowly because you're at a low opacity with the soft edged brush. Remember, you can always use the paint dropper, pick up the colors that are underneath, paint those in. And you could set your dropper now to not just be current layer, but current layer and below.